Good morning, everyone. Welcome to HogvilleNET YouTube Live. It is I'm not quite daily or multiple times a day, but it's getting busy this week. We came on Monday morning at 7 a.m. today, a little after 7:30 a.m. Kind of bring you the latest. I knew after a kind of a rush of information was coming out Sunday night and some things I was gathering from my sources that this would be a very busy week. We came and addressed the Carter Knox visit that was impending Monday afternoon. He arrived well into the afternoon, not early afternoon. And, by 6 p.m. Central Time, Carter Knox was off the board, committed to McDonald's All American, the 5-star, giving Arkansas two players under John Calipari now so far with 13 scholarships to fill. Carter made it the second one behind Big Z, the Kentucky transfer, who a week prior had made a commitment. Had been really quiet in that middle time from Monday to Monday. It's been anything but quiet this week, with the exception of Wednesday. Things kind of slowed down yesterday in terms of news coming out. There was a flood of it on Tuesday. So you had the visit, Carter Knox visit and commitment on Monday. And then Tuesday, we had a flood of information coming out, including upcoming visitors, which last night, two of those arrived. There's more expected through the weekend. I put an interesting tweet out last night that I'm going to explain here, but I want to welcome you again to HogvilleNET YouTube Live. This is our John Calipari rush to fill up a roster commitment watch, however you want to put it, countdown to commitments. I think he's blasting off this week. I think we've seen one already. It will not be like last week where we saw only one. So far, one on the board on Monday, and now as we get closer to the end of the week and through the weekend, I think we're going to see more. And I'm going to explain that. Please hit the subscribe button. Please do that, or hit like also if you want. But the subscribe button, we appreciate the traffic and bringing the content, and we hope you'll subscribe. All right, so let's start getting into this. Someone saying, appreciate your updates. Thank you. I don't have any fancy microphones or studios or graphics or music. I do try to deliver quality information. I think most of the time we get it right. Sometimes it's a little more nuanced, and you have to thread the needle on some things or fans won't be happy. And so some folks are never going to be happy based on how it's delivered, because they want everything to be clean and precise and put a bow on it. And sometimes it doesn't work that way. Here's where the exception is. I mentioned the tweet I put out last night. I'm going to go through recruiting, obviously, today, even beyond filling up the class of 2024 to complete a roster. But I think great momentum is underway here this week in terms of it actually things being announced. So that will put a bow on it for some people, maybe not. But having said that, we know move-in date is at the end of May. Typically, Memorial Day weekend and the week that follows Memorial Day weekend into early June is when you start to see the majority of your players move on to campus. And so we're roughly a month away from that. That's why I think we're going to continue to see more dominoes fall in terms of actual public commitments. But let's go through some of that. I put a tweet out last night, two already delivered. What that meant was, obviously, in my opinion, it should have been obvious. Maybe for others it wasn't. Not very cryptic. Big Z, Zvonimir Ivisic, the 7'2" forward center, transfer from Kentucky, and of course Carter Knox, who I just talked about, the McDonald's All-American 4-star, previously committed to Kentucky, decommitted as Calipari was leaving Lexington, coming to Fayetteville to be the new Arkansas head coach. Carter Knox off the board. Those are your two that are already delivered. 4 on board. Now, this is not really that complicated, but there may be a little bit of nuance to consider here as I go through this. Some of this stuff is out there in terms of speculation. I believe it's beyond speculation at this point, based on not only reporting, but some stuff I've been able to find kind of behind the scenes and some stuff. But you don't bring in a Boogie Flan, the next McDonald's All-American. ESPN has him ranked 15th in the country in the class of 2024, high-level 5-star, obviously. Technically the highest rated of the McDonald's All-Americans at this point when you look at ESPN's rankings that were committed or signed with Kentucky. We'll talk a little bit more about Jaden Quaintance and the fact he's off the board, just to kind of, give a formality on update on that, which we started to learn that on Monday, or excuse me, on Tuesday when I came on to talk about Boogie Flan and that impending visit. But Boogie Flan, in concert with Billy Richmond, another former Kentucky commit who recently decommitted, a 5-star, if you look at the composite rankings, national number 25 in the composite, it's an aggregate of the major services, and they rate him a 5-star. If you break it down per service, he's a 4-star. Boogie Flan, 5-star. Flan we've talked at length about both of or especially Flan, not as much about Billy Richmond, but both of those guys arrived Wednesday night. These are things you already know for a visit. These are players that are not being brought in as catch and release. Okay, this is not a tour. I don't think Calipari's bringing guys in at this point from the high school level that were committed or signed with him at Kentucky. I don't think he's bringing them on campus in Fayetteville for catch and release. I think this is one of those things where it signals commitments. In fact, based on stuff I'm getting on the in my own source information, there are some procedural things that have already happened that tell you that these guys are going to be, or if not already publicly committed, privately committed, and now it's a matter of time when they're publicly committed. Some procedural things beyond just signed letters of intent. Okay, so that's as far as I'll go with it. But there are some procedural things behind the scenes that tell me that these guys are already on board. Now it's a matter of time of announcing it. Well, you're saying, well, they're visiting. Isn't that obvious? Not always obvious. And something would have to blow up at this point for both Fland and Billy Richmond not to be Razorbacks. Could their announcements come out today? Well, they arrived last night. Carter Knox arrived in the afternoon. Later that evening, his announcement came out. These guys arrived a little bit later in the day. No announcements last night. Do I expect announcements today? I think they probably will be today. I don't have source information on exactly when it'll be. Procedurally, behind the scenes, these guys are Razorbacks. Something would have to blow up. Okay, so there's two more. We've been talking about Jordan Burks, and I'm going to go back and talk about the qualities of these players. We've done that already, but we'll hit it some more. Jordan Burks, the transfer from Kentucky, 6'8" wing, was a freshman last year, little used, but showed flashes, and he's a guy that on the overtime elite circuit, similar to Carter Knox, who put up great numbers on the overtime elite circuit. I mean, he's an alpha scorer. Knox is an elite scorer, has that mentality. You wouldn't talk like that in those terms about Jordan Burks. Again, 6'8" wing, brings you some versatility because he can play that 3-4 in a small ball, can defend threes. And he did. He had a 13.5 rebound game and a blowout road win for Kentucky last year as a freshman again at Vanderbilt. But he's not a guy you would talk about as a prolific scorer. But in overtime elite, prior to that, coming in there, I think it was over 27 points per game. So I'm not saying to expect that kind of development, that kind of what he would bring to the table in terms of that. But he's a guy who's been on campus. I reported a few days ago that Calipari was out to dinner with he and his family. I think it's just a matter of time before that's announced and before that becomes public. How they time things and why they time things, sometimes there's stuff behind the scenes that are being worked out that have to be done before they're comfortable doing that. And so we'll see on that one in terms of when. But that's one of the three on board. So I said there were four on board. I've named three of them: Boogie Fland, Billy Richmond, and Jordan Burks. Something has to absolutely blow up at this point to change those things. I don't say anything's 100%. Even if they announce a commitment, we know something could happen later. You feel better about it. I know I will. So I'm never 100%, but it's close on all three of those guys to 100%. I'm waiting on the public announcements to feel like, all right, probably not backing away from this. Something has to blow up. So those guys are on board as we speak. I said there were four. The other one is, and this one took me a little time to come around to it being solid. But again, I go back to the procedural thing behind the scenes. Johnell Davis, the 6'4" guard from Florida Atlantic, I believe is at least privately committed to Arkansas. There's some procedural things that lead me to believe that this is moving forward in terms of him being a Razorback. Now, his situation is different in my opinion. He's in the NBA draft right now. He has till May 27th to withdraw. If you look back in the past, even in the Eric Melsman era, you had guys that were still in the draft pool when they committed to Arkansas, signed the financial aid agreement. What you're really paying attention to is when do they get on campus? When do they enroll for summer school, if then, or if they wait till later? You're paying attention to that. But even Justin Smith, one of Melsman's early portal commitments and a guy that was on campus, the transfer from Indiana that helped Arkansas to that first Elite Eight, even he didn't formally withdraw from the NBA draft until he was already on campus, already enrolled in summer school, and already part of the team. So keep an eye on Johnell Davis in terms of what could the pros sway him, even if he's committed to Arkansas, even if he ends up on campus and enrolled. You always pay attention. Will Calipari accept a commitment and let it be public until that part's resolved? That's what I don't know. I do know there's some procedural stuff behind the scenes that lead me to believe that's already in motion. So I believe that is a silent commitment at this point. That's a little bit of speculation, but some of the procedural stuff, some of the other things going on, make me believe there's a commitment there. Okay, again, his this is the truth about transfers versus high school players who sign letters of intent. We know high school players that sign letters of intent can get out of those letters of intent. It happens all the time now. It used to be more difficult, especially when there's a coaching change. We just saw it with some of these Kentucky guys we're talking about that are now in the wheelhouse for Arkansas. Not Carter Knox. He only had committed. He didn't need a release. Boogie Flan needed a release. Okay. Those things can happen pretty quickly, and then you're free to move on. The interest, but they're still binding until you formally ask for the release. The interesting thing about transfers is they sign a financial aid agreement. They could sign 2,000 financial aid agreements with 2,000 schools, whatever. I'm just making up a number. We know there's not that many D1 schools. What matters is the school is bound to that to honor it. The player's not. The player it's wherever the player enrolls. So it's a little bit different. And so I'm not sure what else needs to be ironed out there in terms of the pro part for him. And then always you're keeping an eye on the fact that we've seen it before. We've seen commitments and financial aid agreements. Was it Moss, Isaiah Moss, back in one of Musselman's recruiting classes that signed a financial aid agreement, committed to Arkansas, and then he flipped to Bill Self in Kansas. I'm just bringing up examples. I'm not saying something like that would happen here. I'm saying something like that could happen here. I'm not trying to give you a bunch of word salad. I'm trying to say there are realities about this stuff, especially with transfers. When you're in the portal, that it's a little bit different than the concepts of signing a national letter of intent, which is what high school players do. Even those can be wiggled out of, but it's still there are formalities where you'd have to do that. The transfers don't have to wiggle out of anything if they sign anything. So there's procedural stuff in play that tell me that Johnell Davis is going to be an Arkansas Razorback next year. If something doesn't blow up and he changes his mind, some other school comes in and does something because the financial aid agreement. I'm not saying I know for a fact he signed that. I'm saying there's some procedural stuff behind the scenes that tells me it's in motion for him to be a Razorback. Those things, in my opinion, wouldn't be happening unless there was some kind of silent commitment there at this point. Still don't have any official word about a visit when something like that might happen, or if it has happened. Don't have any information on that. And so you say, well, why put a tweet out saying on board? I've seen enough to think he's on board, but I'm also just putting out the qualifiers about things that can be triggered to screw that up later. And I know some people get tired of me saying process and results. I think most transfers, when they make a commitment, end up following that commitment, but it doesn't always work out that way. This is one of the most coveted transfers, if arguably in Johnell Davis, the most coveted transfer on the market. And so anytime you start dealing with 5 stars and transfers of that caliber, the recruiting is just a little bit more intense, a little bit more different, and there's a lot of promises being made. And so John Calipari is the best at it. I think he's threading needles with things at this point. That's why I think that probably ends up playing out to be true that Johnell Davis is an Arkansas Razorback, which then, if that's the case, if that's what I believe, in addition to Flan and Richmond coming off the board very soon, we know Carter Knox has, you're talking about 6'6", 6'6", 6'4", and with Flan 6'2", but you're talking about combo guards and wings in some of these guys that already give Arkansas arguably one of the top backcourts in the country based on talent, based on projecting to the next levels, based on it, and then with in the case of Davis, experience. I mean, he was the American AAC Conference Player of the Year last year. Was I was surprised to see he wasn't at least honorable mention All-American, but 18.2 points per game, 6.3 rebounds, 2.9 assists, 1.4 steals. I've got his stats memorized. over 48% shooting from the field, 41.4% from three, and 85.7% from the free throw line. Those shooting splits, when you see high levels of production, you always look at the shooting splits, how efficient. Sometimes those stats can lie. In his case, they don't. He brought it against big time competition. I mean, the 35.9 rebound, three assists, three steal game, and a 1 point double overtime loss to the fourth ranked Arizona Wildcats back in December. I think he hung 26 on Texas A&M in that game, which was an entertaining game. And he just put up numbers all year. Had 3 games of 30 or more points. I think he had 12 games of 20 or more points, several games of 25 or more, but not to 30. So when you look at his average, it wasn't one of those things where he was loading up against inferior competition and padding those stats there. He got his against quality. So Johnell Davis to me is the kind of guy that you bring in that you're already eyeballing for some kind of all SEC potential. And when you're looking at 5-star guys, it can play several ways. 5-star guys don't always splash, especially in the age of transfer portal. Because we're going to talk about some guys Arkansas's reached out to are in the transfer portal from Duke, both McDonald's All-Americans, year before last, and they're not one and dones. They're one and done at Duke, moving on to another college somewhere. But you look at their stats, and it's not all 5-star McDonald's All-Americans going and banging out as freshmen. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. But the ones Arkansas has in play here, Carter Knox and I believe Boogie Fland at any time coming off the board. I would be shocked if these were just casual visits and moving on to the next visit. I just don't think for the high school part of it, the fact that Calipari had these guys in the fold before for Kentucky, I don't think he's bringing them on campus as catch and release. I think this is, you're mounting the trophy on this one. You're weighing the fish and you're bagging it. I mean, I don't want to minimize human beings as fish. I'm trying to come up with, metaphors, analogies, what have you, parables. But I think it's just a matter of time, probably today, where we hear something. If not today, I'd be even surprised by that if these commitment announcements aren't sometime today. Uh, yeah, the Boogie Flan, I was talking about that. These guys got in last night in the evening, early evening, sometime in the evening. So, they posted on Instagram photos of their arrival in Fayetteville. You see recruits do that. Aside from that, no, I've had a couple of conversations with folks on campus, but nothing specific in terms of how it's going. So I'll put it that way. But again, based on information I have, those 4 names, I went back through them. Boogie Flan, just ultra talent, electric in the open court as a decision maker, as a scorer, facilitator, can create one of the best shot creators at his stage in development that I've seen. And I've compared him a little bit to Kyrie Irving. Look, Kyrie Irving's on an island. When you make those comparisons, you have to be careful. I'm not saying he's that good. I'm saying there's stuff in his arsenal that remind me of some of the trickery Kyrie has. And you start thinking about, well, that's not really trickery. That's just what he can do. You see it more and more and more. And so there's an element of illusion in some of the stuff he does, and it makes it hard for defenders to keep up with him. And he does a great job of creating space. 6'2", slight of build, needs to add weight and get stronger. He will. He'll get. He'll develop some physical stuff there to deal in the SEC. How quickly do you project he's going to bulk up as a freshman? Not necessarily. He'll get stronger, but he does a really good job using quickness and craft to create space and finishing angles. And he's more of a scoring guard. They call him a combo guard. I think he's more of a scorer, but he does have a setup game as well, and he's a willing facilitator. Billy Richmond, just a superb athlete. Last year, Richmond over 17 points, 7 rebounds, 1.5 blocks per game, 1.5 steals per game at Camden High School. Shot decently over 70, 73, 74% at the free throw line. I think he made 24 threes last year as a high school senior at Camden in 30 games. So he's not a guy that takes or makes a ton of threes, but I think that's part of his game is emerging. He's a lefty, very athletic. I notice he likes to drive and then pull up. But what he really likes to do, what he's really known for, is just a mad dog drive to the rim and dunk on people. Whether it's in half-quarter transition, if he sees an angle, he's got great burst, really good size. He's sturdy at 6'6". He's not lanky. He's built just right. He's athletic as hell, and he wants to get to that rim. He wants to get mean on the rim, and I think defensively is where he has a chance to be elite. Plus defender, elite defender, however you want to frame it. He's got a chance to be elite. He can come out of his area to block shots and help situations, whether it's transition or just a guy beating his man off the dribble in half court, and he comes over and helps. He gets deflections. He gambles and jumps passing lanes and gets steals. So he'll have to learn how to, be effective in those areas. At the college level, the high major level, because defensive schemes, planning, all those things require discipline also. So he'll have to pick and choose when to do those things a little better than when you gamble a lot as a raw talent and on the high school level, and you can just bully folks, and you're just bigger, faster, stronger than everybody, more athletic. The playing field gets a little more level as you move up, so you got a nuance. But he's a guy that I think could be an elite defender. And I mentioned Jordan Burks. I think he's going to be a good college player. We'll see how good he can be. But I think he's following Calipari here to Arkansas. And again, Johnell Davis, to me, four seasons at Florida Atlantic. He's got a COVID fifth season. And he's a guy that, again, I see him as being on board at this point. There are other things in play, pro basketball, and we've seen before, until these transfers get on campus, they could sign they could sign countless financial aid agreements, and it's wherever they show up and enroll. So I'm not saying that'll happen. That's not the norm, but it does happen. It's happened at Arkansas to the previous staff. Very doubtful that happens to Calipari. So I throw that in the mix as well. Makes me believe that's happening. Now, again, to me, things would have to blow up at this point for the first three names. It's a little more complicated, obviously, with Johnell Davis. Just a little bit more complicated there because he does have the pro option. And again, does somebody come in and sweeten the deal for him before he could ever get enrolled in on campus? So those are things you keep an eye on. How long do these things drag out before being publicly announced? I think, again, with Fland, Richmond, and Burks, it'll be sooner rather than later. Then you hope that's the case with Johnell. Does Jay Will have any playoff points? I think in game one, did he knock down a three? I'm trying to remember. Maybe he hit a three in game one. Yeah, I think he scored. I think Jalen Williams in game one of Oklahoma City's 2-point win. Yeah, he had 6 points in that game. He didn't score last night. The Thunder are up 2-0. Isaiah Joe, 8 points, 3 of 4 from the field, 2 of 2 from three, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, box plus 3. Drew an offensive foul. Jay Will finished with a rebound and assist. He drew a charge on Brandon Ingram in the first half, and he played, I think, 17. Both guys played 17 minutes, so both of them contributed to a win, and it was a blowout last night. 124 to 92, a 32-point win. So in both games, the Thunder held the Pelicans to 92 points. The difference was a 2-point win in game one, a 32-point win in game two. Now the series shifts. It's a very young Oklahoma City team, and people don't realize this. I mean, they probably realize Zion Williamson's out. He's not playing, which changes things. It changes things. But it also gives other guys opportunities, and sometimes it can flip the matchup a little bit. And Zion Williamson's hard to deal with in terms of his ability to score a lot in the paint and get to the basket and play above the rim. But at the same time, there's a more perimeter focus now a lot for New Orleans, and sometimes just a change in those matchups can either favor or hurt the opponent. I thought in game one it hurt Oklahoma City trying to make an adjustment without Williamson. And I thought last night it was more like what I thought might happen with him out. Now the series shifts to New Orleans. New Orleans was the best road team the Pelicans were. I'm going to get back to Razorback talk. They were the best road team in the NBA during the regular season. Not as good at home. So that game one might be their. I still think they'll put up a fight at home. We'll see. But Oklahoma City, in my opinion, is probably going to win it in 5 games, maybe a sweep. And if it goes 6, that means that a young Oklahoma City team is figuring out how to win in the playoffs. All right, let's get back to the Razorbacks. Let's go through some more of these names. I also mentioned in my tweet last night, outside of the 2 that were delivered, Big Z, Carter Knox, 4 on board. I see that now as Boogie Flan, Billy Richmond, Jordan Burks, and Johnell Davis. Caveats a little bit with Johnell Davis because of the stuff I mentioned. So, uh, and now I said there were two that were basically in play. That things were starting to move with two more. We know Jonas Adu is scheduled to make a visit this weekend. He's one of the two that I'm referring to. I'm not as sure about this visit resulting in a commitment. I think it very well could. Anytime you get him on campus, it could. I'm not as convinced that that one's heading to that point. Um, but I think with Calipari, as good as he is, and as good as the track record is with big men, the fact that Kenny Payne is coming into town, I'm told he'll be arriving here any day now, today, tomorrow. Uh, to me, not only are you rolling out a red carpet, the guy's already taken a Baylor visit. He's got Arkansas, Baylor, North Carolina, and Alabama in his Final Four. I don't know if he's determined to visit all four places. That could factor into this. He's the kind of guy, if you're John Calipari, with the experience on the front line, with the talent on the front line, all SEC. Calipari saw him this year. We all did. This guy was second team all SEC. I've been saying he only was playing 27 minutes per game. I got that wrong. I have to self correct. Jonas Adu, the 6'11 forward, was 24.7 minutes. I got that confused in a couple of talking points. So less than 25 minutes per game, over 11 points, over 7 rebounds, nearly 2 blocks per game, only 25 minutes. And so, he's a guy that when I look at his work and transition, getting to the rim, finishing at the rim, getting putbacks, playing above the rim, protecting the rim as a shot blocker, altering shots, his motor, his athleticism, and the more talent you put around him, the more that you have to, teams don't always account for him for some whatever reason. He's not a guy that I've seen doubled very much. Now, when you've got a Dalton Connect as a first team All American that's a bucket getter, you have to pick your poison. At Arkansas, I'm already starting to see an assembly here of players that can go and score, and so that I think that's what helps aid Adu's efficiency, not just his efficiency, 51% from the field, uh, but his production is the fact that you can only cover so many guys. And when you've got a 6'11 guy who's athletic, who can get out of his space to get offensive rebounds, putbacks, can run the floor, finish over your defense, you can throw it over a defense in transition. He's going to gobble it up. Nobody's going to beat him to the rim. So you've got all kinds of reasons why he can give you some offensive production. But what you're really looking for, or to me, a lot of the blue collar stuff he brings with that length and athleticism that elevates your team on both ends because he's always a factor in some way or another. And I love guys like that. I think if he'd have played a heavier minute load at Tennessee, it's not one of those guys where you look at and go, if you play more than a certain amount of minutes, you might lose some of the value. I think he's a guy that you could actually get more value out of and maybe first team all SEC kind of numbers had he gotten a little bit more run. I'm not saying Calipari will use him that way. Calipari likes to limit minutes sometimes too, even with some of his better players. Sometimes not. We just have to see who puts around him. And on the front line so far, all we have is Big Z. But Jonas Adu and Big Z, I mean, you've got a multitude of options there. If you get him in terms of how you play those guys, you could play them together, you could alternate them, and there are going to be other bigs in the picture here. We're going to talk about some of that. And we're almost 30 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, if you're not already a subscriber. Um, Jordan Burks, I talked about him. He's a guy that's in the fold. I think he's one of the four who's already on board. It's just not announced yet. For those that are just joining, he, he's been on campus. He's a transfer from Kentucky, 6'8" wing, was a freshman last year, played in 20 games, and didn't put up any crazy stats or anything like that. But just getting back to Jonas Adu, this is a guy where things are moving quickly on. You get them on campus, that's huge. If they're coming to visit you and they're down to 4 schools, I'm not sure how that lands yet. But you'll have Kenny Payne on board in Fayetteville as part of this visit, I'm told. And so we know that Payne was hired as associate head coach last week. I don't know if he has spent any time in Fayetteville. I haven't confirmed whether he spent any time in Fayetteville, but the way I'm hearing it is he's going to be arriving, if not today, very soon. And then you've got, you think Jonas Adu's coming in. I've heard on the down low that maybe Brandon Garrison is also due for a visit. potentially sometime in the next few days. How would those things, how would they intersect? How would they overlap? How does that work? Because you're talking about another big man, a McDonald's All-American in 2023, freshman in Oklahoma State last year, 7.5 points, 5.3 rebounds, and he did average over a block per game. He started a lot, efficient, 57% from the field, low 60s at the free throw, or was he in the 50s? I think low 60s at the free throw line. I actually may have that written down somewhere. Um, but Brandon Garrison is another guy that's in play, and another big man. And so, is it one of those situations where you think it's one or the other, Adu or him? That I don't know the answer to. I can speculate. You'd love to get both of them. I don't know if that's a realistic, if that's if that's a realistic outcome result. But again, Jonas Adu, he's someone that I think they're going to put everything on the table for him. I think he is priority number one big man out of the transfer portal at this point. Brandon Garrison very well may be 1A, right up there. But both of those guys, I mean, Garrison's a guy that's back, more of a back to the basket. Um, both guys are light on their feet getting to the rim. I think Adu is a little bit more active, crashing down from wings, moving to the dunker spot, a little bit more active. I think Brandon Garrison's more of a guy that anchors a little bit more, and you pitch it into him. He can go right or left into the paint, finish over his shoulder. Decent drop step game, and he'll shoot a little bit facing up if you leave him wide open, 14, 15 feet. Those elbows and free throw line extended area. So most of his game and impact will be around the rim, but he's a guy that also in transition can be a spectacular finisher. And you throw him lob passes and off your different sets where he's an option rolling, then you've got something there. And he's a guy that you again, can he paint? Known for look at the runs, the run at Kentucky with Calipari and the great big men they had. I know it's a little bit removed time wise, but those guys can deliver in terms of development, getting them on the biggest stages, and we know playing in the SEC plus Calipari's brand, plus some of the non-conference scheduling, I'm sure they're going to do that. A guy like that can benefit from everything that Arkansas has to offer. Then NIL is the other part of that, but maybe the biggest part. How do they sort through all that? Arkansas is a player in the NIL. Calipari was pitching it yesterday. They're saying, they're putting it out there. Hey, there's a lot of talk about what we have, what we need it. We need to get there. Help us get there. And so, there's no better spokesman for that kind of thing than Calipari, because people know what'll happen if he needs any help at all. It's NIL. That's it. The rest of it he's got. So get the NIL right. Arkansas is going to win its fair share of these big time recruiting battles. Jonas Adu is a guy that I think is very much in the mix. I still think DJ Wagner. I've got a little bit of I'll call it reporting insight that I'll bring here now. Adu Thero, the 6'8" wing that's played 2 seasons at Kentucky under Calipari, who's testing pro options. It's been mentioned that Arkansas is maybe among 5 schools that are in the mix for him. It's been kind of quiet on him. Outside of that, there's not been a lot of talk about that. But I continue to hear that Arkansas is working on getting him to come to Fayetteville and be a Razorback. And so it's not something you see that initial list a few days ago. But Adu Thero's productive. He's not a majorly high productive guy, but a rotational role player. Where there's not a ton of question marks about him being able to help you in a rotation, because he's done a lot of that at Kentucky. We saw him against Arkansas making plays, having an impact. Active guy, athletic guy, length, versatile. He can guard multiple positions, and he just goes in there and gives you energy and makes plays. His production was fairly good in 2 seasons. Last year, 7.2 points, 5 rebounds. And shot 49% from the field, stepped out and took a few threes, 32% there, and 80% free throw shooter. So Adu Thero, again, 6'8" with length, and he's playing that, he can be a 3-4 combo. The way Calipari recruits, he's got a lot of tall, athletic guys. And so you'll see a 6'8" guy at the 3 spot. I mentioned it the other day, Trey Lyles back in the day with Karl Anthony Towns and Willie Cauley-Stein. You had 6'10" guy Trey Lyles, who's in the NBA now with the Sacramento Kings. Good backups, rotation guy. He was their three. He was Kentucky's three when he was in the starting lineup. He played six man too, but he was also started some. He was their 3 man at 6'10". So when you start seeing some of these heights and you have to remember what you've seen about the player and understand what Calipari likes to do. It'll be a little bit different. So you know, Thero can be wing. He can be 3-4, be a four in a small ball lineup, but you'll see him a lot playing the wing. And it's always about who you can defend, and he can defend the wings. Arkansas is really trying to get that in motion in terms of him being a Razorback. So I'm giving you a little bit of insight there that maybe you didn't know. I don't assume things when I see these lists. Yeah, Arkansas's in the top five. That sounds good. We haven't heard anything since then. That was a few days ago, and that could mean a lot of things. Plus, he is testing the pro waters, so we'll see about Adu Thero. DJ Wagner's another one it's been really quiet on. I think the addition of Kenny Payne helps there, and I will not be one bit surprised if he's. I've had one source tell me that outside of Aaron Bradshaw, who's already gone to Ohio State, one source who's well connected gives me really good information. This may be a little bit of speculation because he didn't give me anything concrete in terms of A happened, so B is going to be the next thing that happens in it. It wasn't quite like that, but he did tell me he felt like anybody that's in the transfer portal for Kentucky that Calipari wants will be a Razorback, with the exception of Aaron Bradshaw. He wasn't just saying that after the fact because he'd already moved on to Ohio State. He said everyone knew when he got in the portal that he was moving on, and he wasn't sure that Cal wanted him anyway. At that point, he was pretty sure he didn't. Not trying to disparage the young man, but sometimes things don't work out. Anybody else coming into that Kentucky portal, this source tells me if Calipari wants him, he'll get him. And so I think, keep an eye on DJ Wagner and Duke Thero. There's another name that just went in, and I talked about him on Tuesday. Um, I talked about this player on Tuesday because he had just gone in the portal, and it's Ugonna Onyenso. The 7-footer was a sophomore last year at Kentucky, big time rim protector. 2.8 blocks per game in just under 19 minutes per outing. Had a 10 block game, had an 8 block game, had 5 games with, I believe he had 5 games with 5 or more blocks, or 4 or more blocks, something like that. I looked it up the other day. But he's in the portal. He was a guy that was talking about he was going to hire an agent, be done with college, and now he's in the portal, still in the NBA draft pool, hasn't withdrawn. You always keep an eye on that. But he's a guy that's gone in. I have no momentum as far as information on does that mean Arkansas's in play all of a sudden. So I can't speak to that. However, I do believe my sources telling me anybody going into that Kentucky portal from Kentucky that Calipari wants will end up at Arkansas. So we'll see if that would be true here with this player, if Arkansas has any interest. Maybe a lot of that has to do with how things go with Jonas Adu and a Brandon Garrison. We'd have to keep an eye on that. There's some other players. So we've kind of really gone through everything here now. We haven't talked about Somtu Cyril, the 6'10", 252-pound overtime elite Kentucky signee who got out of his letter of intent, has already visited Georgia. That's another big man that could still be in play. There's just not been a lot of talk about that one of late, and I don't have any specific source information that tells me that that's a situation that's rushing toward Arkansas and Calipari at this time. Doesn't mean that it's not. I just don't have any information on that part of it. And so, that's one to also keep an eye on. Overtime elite, over 9 rebounds, over 9 points, 3.5 blocks per game. And here's a guy that was playing just over 20 minutes. So when you look at, the volume, the work and the volume and the sample size of minutes, it's pretty impressive. And he's a guy, again, that, would be a freshman. So you never know how that's going to play out. All right, Arkansas, when we look at the regular portal now, just other stuff that's out there and guys that Arkansas's contacted, there's Kason Pryor, 6'9", 6'10", forward, versatile guy, a face-up guy, got a little swagger to him out of South Florida. The Bulls were the best team in the American Athletic Conference, the AAC, last year, won that league. And this guy, 13 points, nearly 8 rebounds per game, 35% from three. He likes to step out and shoot a little bit, 81.5% at the free throw line. So you look at his numbers, there's a lot to like there. You like the size. Again, he brings some swagger. He's a veteran guy. And so is this a guy that would be in play uh, in a serious way moving forward. We know Arkansas has reached out to him, have not got any insight as to where that is right now, but that's just a name and a player to talk about. I think I've brought his name up before on here. Ezra Asar is one of the more recent guys that Arkansas has contacted. Another guy with size and a front court guy, 6'9", 240, a forward, East Carolina transfer, and 11.4 points, 4.7 rebounds. Not the biggest rebounder at 6'9", 51% from the field. He's got the identical 3-point shooting numbers to Big Z, 6 of 16 last year, so 37.5%. Good efficiency for a tall guy. Of course, in basketball now, you can't keep talking like that. A lot of the big guys now, the way the game's played, can stretch the floor and shoot a little bit. Not all, but there are more and more of that. But 6 of 16 from three, 37.5%, and a 65% free throw shooter. So Arkansas has been in contact with him among other schools. Ezra Asar. And then, we break it down here recently. A couple of Duke freshmen last year, both McDonald's All-Americans 2023, both of them 6'9" players are in the portal, and both of them saw limited action and didn't put up a ton of numbers. But Sean Stewart, who we've already talked about, TJ Power, again, both 6'9", both were freshmen at Duke, both on the portal. Arkansas has contacted both McDonald's All-Americans in 2023. People keep talking about how this 2024 NBA draft is weak. That's another reason when I've talked about some of these guys that are testing pro waters to keep an eye on it, because a lot of times guys will stay in a draft just because it's weak. And even if they don't get drafted, they may like their chances of not only getting two-way deals, but earning like Ricky Council was able to do this year if it's a weak draft. Because if it's a weak draft, that tends to be not only at the top, but throughout, and then it might be favorable for you to be in that pool of players. Get in there now. All right, getting back to that and talking about that, one of the reasons is some of these top level players that were McDonald's All-Americans, all that, when you look around it, a lot of those guys weren't splashing. What are there, 11 or 12 McDonald's All-Americans from 2023 that are in the portal? And I think that number has grown, but these are two of them. And so Sean Stewart, 2.6 points, 3.2 rebounds. He is a volume rebound. That's the one thing about Stewart I noticed when I went and looked at his minutes and the actual numbers. Sean Stewart at 6'9" is a volume rebounder and has a high rebounding percentage when he's on the floor. And he shot 57% from the field in the limited, 2.6 points. So, but he was efficient, 53% free throw shooter. TJ Power, not as impressive as far as unimpressive stats. His are less impressive. 2.1 points, less than a rebound per game in 6.7 minutes. So he didn't play as much. Made 1 out of every 3 field goal attempts. Shot 35.7% from three. So I don't know, probably 3 of 8 or something like that. I don't remember the exact number there. And 85.7% from the free throw line. But again, a very small amount of free throw attempts there. So those are a couple of names to keep an eye on. Does Calipari look at these 6'9" guys? Because I've gone through here from the portal, 2 Duke freshmen, Ezra Asar and Kason Pryor, as kind of being recent names we've seen as far as Arkansas making contact. And there's less and less of you're seeing contacts being announced with guards. I think that speaks volumes to what we talked about when we came on. The fact that you've started with knocking those dominoes down with Carter Knox. I think Boogie Flynn, Billy Richmond, Jordan Burks, even though he's 6'8", 6'9", 3'4", he can defend on the wing. And then Johnell Davis, obviously. I think he's on board. Does that stick? Does that hold? He's on board now. What is there anything that would change that? The other situations, the other 3 I just mentioned, something major has to just blow up for those guys not to be Hogs. For Johnell Davis, he's got options. And it works a little bit differently for transfers because of the nature of the binding part with the financial aid agreements versus an NIL. There is nuance there. All right, but getting back to some of these options now, if what I'm saying is true, we've got 4 on board in addition to the 2 already delivered. That's 6. That's almost half your roster. So I think, and I told you, I said this on Monday morning. We came on at 7 a.m. Midday. I think I came on at 1 on Tuesday. Poor timing on my part. I needed to wait 1 more hour because I came on to talk about Boogie Flynn and Ugana Onyenso going in the portal from Kentucky. and gave a little bit more of an update on Jordan Burks. And while I was on was when all the news came that Jaden Quaintance had eliminated Arkansas. I haven't talked about that. The 6'9" McDonald's All-American that had signed with Kentucky got out of his letter of intent, had Arkansas along with Louisville, where he'd already visited, and Memphis, where he's supposed to visit this weekend, in Arkansas, 3 places that he was going to visit, had already done that with Louisville, and now we hear that Arkansas is out of the mix. I speculated when that was coming over on the comments. People were telling me that because I was doing this, that NIL was probably the biggest thing at play there. I still believe that from what I've been able to patch together. I still believe that NIL is a, you're talking about a 16-year-old that brings a lot of talent. You're talking about a package. You're a different kind of NIL package, a commitment or pledge, because he's got to be 2 years somewhere. And so when you're in on some bigger fish that have, in terms of experience and guys that can help you win now, it may complicate how you shuffle your NIL and compensate guys. And it may not be. Would you rather have Adu or Garrison? Based on results, Adu. He's a more veteran player. He's an all SEC player. And we're in an era where guys that are McDonald's All-Americans like Brandon Garrison, could he make a jump? I mean, he had a decent season at Oklahoma State. One guy's more proven, long term, I can't say which one projects better, but I would, in terms of the pros. But I don't care about that. I think what I care about most is how can they help Arkansas win immediately, and I think Adu checks that box. I could be wrong about that. I mean, Garrison could come in and it's exactly what he needed. He's got Kenny Payne and Calipari, and he's got the right pieces around him. And so I don't have a crystal ball on that, but just looking at results so far, I'd say Jonas Adu is the guy that you want there. And I think it's a win either way. If you got both of them, I mean, I would be surprised if Arkansas is able to land both of those guys. That would surprise me. But I mean, maybe I'm in for some surprises. But anyway, Jaden Quaintance apparently off the board. I guess things can change in recruiting, and that could circle back around somehow. Who knows? But for now, we think he's off the board. Somtu Cyril, again, it's quiet. I've got nothing that shows any momentum. The 6'10" big man that had signed and got already out of his release with Kentucky, played at overtime elite with Carter Knox. I don't have anything that tells me that Arkansas is the front runner here. They might be, and there's just not enough information that's trickled out to me to get there. I haven't seen anything nationally either on that. Maybe someone else has. Maybe someone else has seen it. All right, but we've been talking so much. Laser focus. I was going to do this for 30 minutes. I talked too much. I'm already to 48. I guess we're going to go an hour because I got some other stuff I want to cover. Won't put as much time into this because we've spent so much time laser focused on getting this roster, which should be the number one priority. Obviously, the staff. I'll give you a little bit nuggets on the staff. Some of you may already know this, but I've got sources that tell me some of the Kentucky guys, some of the Kentucky staff that haven't been formally announced yet have been in Fayetteville and are in Fayetteville. I don't know how often they're coming and going and getting things. Brad Calipari obviously was there for the introductory press conference. He's been in Fayetteville. Bruiser Flint, we'll see what role he actually gets. Bruiser Flint goes all the way back to the UMass days with Calipari. He's been like one of those special assistants, consultants, kind of like Todd Lee was for Eric Melsman before Melsman promoted him to one of the 5 assistants last year. He's been in that kind of a role. Will he get an assistant role? I don't know the answer to that. He's been in Fayetteville already, so he's already up there. Again, I don't know all the details about coming and going and how much time they're up there, but they're up there. Chin Coleman has been recruiting with on the road with Eric Melsman. We saw that. He was with him at Overtime Elite in Atlanta. So those 3 guys, I'm going to be careful about the other 2 right now. I'm going to be a little bit careful. I say other 2. Chin Coleman, I just mentioned. Chuck Martin is another one of the assistants I'm told will be in play, okay, and will be part of this staff. Have not seen him in videos on the road recruiting with Calipari. I do not have anyone telling me that they've seen him in Fayetteville. So I'll say those 2 things. I'm not saying he hasn't been. I'm saying I don't know. What I will say is there has been there's source information I have that tells me that there's some activity with him in terms of how it might relate to Arkansas in a positive way. So I'm just going to leave that at that for now. I know that's cryptic. But it tells me that he's likely to be announced with the other assistants, like I thought he would. Ronnie Brewer Jr., I think, is it's an interesting situation. I keep saying he's in flux. I think that remains the case, and I think a lot of that's going to come down to what is the position, what is the role, what is the opportunity there for him. There are other opportunities for him, probably. When I say probably, I know there are, but what I mean by probably is I think Arkansas is where he wants to be. I think that's obvious. And so when I use the word probably, it maybe should be a maybe that he would even consider. I don't think anything that's lateral he would consider. In other words, I think it would have to be something um, that's helps advance him as a coach, helps advance his career. Because every coach eventually wants to be a head coach. They want to move up, and so with Ronnie, I think we're just still in wait and see mode a little bit. Um, so there were, you know, less than a handful of folks from the previous regime that technically are still on some kind of staff situation, even though they haven't been necessarily ironed out with what Calipari is going to do. There's still some carryover, just like Scotty Thurman. Scotty Thurman was carryover. He helped the transition. He helped Musselman out. And then when the dust settled, Musselman offered him a more of an administrative role, which he began with Mike Anderson before moving up to assistant coach. And Thurman opted to move on. So he was never formally a part of Musselman's staff, but he was still a staffer until he made that decision, and a formal role was offered to him. I think Brewer's in that. It's hard to articulate because I'm saying more than one thing. He's not on Calipari's staff yet. Maybe will be, but he's still part of the U of A for now in the basketball department. So it's a little bit tricky there. And then Joe Johnson, somebody I've talked about being in play, could be in play. It was serious conversations. Have heard nothing more on that. For a couple of days I was hearing there was some steam there. You know, Joe's a guy that has, he doesn't have a background in coaching. He's been a player. I mean, he's in his early 40s. He's still participating, has been participating in the Big Three, various Team USA events where they ask him to participate. He's been doing that since he's been out of the NBA. So he's a guy that doesn't need a coaching job. He doesn't need a paycheck. This would be about what does he want to do? What's the next chapter for him? And I think there have been serious considerations for him to be a part of what Calipari's doing. I've got sources telling me there's a closeness there, there's a relationship there. He was on campus for the press conference. You say, well, what's so big about that? It was a big deal. That was a big deal. So we'll see. We'll see if that's really something that's going to come to fruition or not. But that wasn't something that was just fantasy talk. There was some real movement there as a potential for him to be brought in. Okay, so we're keeping an eye on staff things. But the interesting part going back to recruiting and beyond building this roster is that Arkansas, under Calipari, they've already made at least four offers that are now out public to the class of 2025. And they've started with top 10 rated guys. Anyone surprised by that? Number one, AJ DeBonsa, 6'8", 6'9", combo forward. He's a wing. He's a East Coast guy, Massachusetts, I think, native, but he's at Prolific Prep out in California, one of the big time national independent schools that plays a great schedule. We know that you have your spring and summer grassroots where all the top players play against each other. And now some of these independent schools, the way it's set up, you just get to keep doing that, measure yourself against the best. And so he's one of those guys, but he's the number one rated player, 5-star, just a few days ago, number one rated player in the country in the class of 2025, gets an Arkansas offer. Caleb Wilson was offered by the previous staff, the fourth rated player, according to ESPN, in that 2025 class, 6'9" power forward out of the Atlanta area. And a guy that, again, Arkansas offer 5-star, ranked fourth in the country. Malik Thomas, 6'4" guard, and out of Pittsburgh, 6'4" guard, seventh ranked according to ESPN, another 5-star, and then another guard, 6'2" guard, Darius Acuff Jr., IMG Academy by way of Detroit, and so he's the ninth rated player in the country according to ESPN. So 1, 4, 7, and 9 received offers from this new Arkansas staff in the last week or so, last several days. And so the recruiting has not just been, because the main focus, we know what it is, but you've got to get these offers out, get them public. These players now know that Calipari wants to bring them to Fayetteville, and you get to go through the recruiting process. And again, uh, NIL can be an equalizer, but if Arkansas's NIL game is powerful with everything else Calipari brings as a recruiter, Arkansas is going to get it continue. Will do what Calipari does, is going to get some of these 5-star McDonald's All-American top guys, maybe annually. You would think that would be annually as long as Calipari's still at Arkansas. All right. A lot of folks have been asking me on the message board at hogville.net. I see it on Twitter, what different tweets I put out, and I'll be asked about this stuff kind of randomly. People are interested. They're always interested in Arkansas players. How could you not be? Look at the history, going back to the triplets. Some of Arkansas's greatest moments, greatest players, greatest teams, most of them have been led by and been their best players have been from Arkansas. Not always the fact, but for the most part. Even Nolan Richardson, who had great recruiting success out of the Memphis area, and some other surrounding states, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, at different times in Memphis. Corliss Williamson was his best player. Joe Johnson was his best player at the end of his time. And probably out of all of that, with as great as Todd Day, Lee Mayberry, Oliver Miller, and some of the other ones were, it was the two Arkansas guys that are waving the banner the best, even under Nolan. And so, going back to Eddie and the triplets, Stan Heath and Ronnie Burr Jr., Sonny Weems brought him in. John Pelfrey's lone tournament run at Arkansas in his first season with Heath players, Sonny Weems was the leading scorer on that team, top player. Patrick Beverly was good, but Sonny Weems. And then, of course, when you move into Mike Anderson, you had guys like Bobby Portis, Daniel Gafford, Isaiah Joe. And so, some of his best teams, the one that in 14-15, where Bobby Portis was SEC Player of the Year, second team All-American, went the NBA draft after that summer. That was Mike Anderson's best team. That team finished ranked. Didn't have any runs in the NCAA tournament, but a really good team. So it was Arkansas Player was his best player. I mentioned Gafford and Isaiah Joe. Then it bled into Moses Moody, Jalen Williams, Devo Davis, Nick Smith Jr. So I went through all that. You knew the history, but I just want to remind you, even in places in the program where you don't want to remember, sometimes Heath and Pelfrey, I can go back and point to success being led by Arkansas guys. It is important. Calipari said in the introductory press conference when asked about it, he says it does start in state. You start there. If we think that we evaluate them, we think they can play, we're going to recruit them. If we think they're good enough to play for us, we're going to recruit them. All right. I've gone through the history of guys that are good enough. That hasn't changed. It's only getting better in the state. So we'll see what happens. But it's been kind of quiet. I've had people bring it up to me, ask me about it. I just mentioned that. And I put this on Twitter last night. I mentioned it on Drive Time Sports, my segment yesterday. It's normally on Tuesdays. We moved it because the Diamond Hawks played early in North Little Rock against UAPB on Tuesday. So we moved it to Wednesday. So I was on at 4:30 and I talked about it then. I put the tweet out last night. But I put the staff has begun outreach to the in-state, to the top talent in-state. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to give you the names of the players that are that are top names in the state, but I'm not going to specifically say who's been contacted and how. And I want you to understand it's just the beginning of outreach. So it's not some massive, already heavily saturated efforts. Just the beginning. So when people see a report like that, they may jump to conclusions. 4 offers went out to top 10 rated 5 stars last week. We're not talking about that yet with the in-state guys. We're not talking about a flood of heavy recruiting. We're talking about the beginnings of outreach. You have to start somewhere. Kind of crickets for a couple of weeks, but we've been crickets on a lot of stuff, right? After Calipari was hired, we thought things would move fast. They're going at his pace. They're going fast enough. And, right now I think it's about to explode this week with some commitments that are announced. I think there are 4 more on board. I just went through that. I tweeted last night. I went through those names. But I'm going to give you the names of the top players in the state right now, but just based on top 100 rankings. So class of 2025. And remember, class of 2025, coaches can have can initiate direct contact with those players. But it starts with Terrion Burgess, 6'9" combo forward out of Benton, 17 and under Arkansas Hawks program that plays on the Adidas 3SSB circuit. They'll be in Birmingham. I believe it's next weekend. Is it next weekend or this weekend? And then Bryan, Texas in May for the live eval period when coaches can actually be out on that 3SSB circuit. But Terrion Burgess, 6'9" combo forward, ranked number 36 in the country, a 4-star according to 247 Sports. On three, and rivals have him ranked in the 40s. So you understand he's a top 50 guy, 36 in the country according to 247 Sports. Love his versatility, athleticism, length, long strider, has a high floor IQ, kind of a stoic, soft-spoken guy, but when you watch him play, very determined and competitive. Gets mad sometimes. When I say mad, and not in a bad way, but in a determined way, in a way that I'm about to take this situation over. And a guy whose skill continues to get better, but a versatile guy can sit down on a three and defend. I call him a combo forward, 6'8", 6'9". I think he's a legit 6'9". I've seen him listed 6'8". He's a legit 6'9". I see him all the time. But the 25 class, when you look at him, Isaiah Seeley, ranked 50th, I believe, in on three, 54th by ESPN, 4-star, 6'6" guard out of Springdale. Another guy that's got is a high major player, a guy that can play in the SEC. Both he and Burgess, to me, are on that level. KK Robinson's younger brother, Kellen Robinson, a little bigger than KK, and he's not a lefty, but Kellen Robinson, star guard for the Bryant Hornets, made it to the 6A title game this year. The Hornets had ran through that, really dominant in that 6A Central, and had swept Little Rock Central in the regular season, then lost to the Tigers in the state title game. But Kellen Robinson, a big-time player, big-time guard, had a big productive game in that title game. But Kellen Robinson has now been bumped into ESPN's top 100 in their release. I think it was just yesterday, the updated top 100 for class of 2025. So Kellen Robinson, 6'6" one guard, checks in at number 95, a 4-star. So you've got 3 in-state players in the class of 2025 that are ranked in one of these major services top 100. When we move to 2026, you've got another 3 players. ESPN just updated its top 60, so top 60 for class of 2026. They haven't expanded it out to 100 yet, but even in the top 60, Arkansas's got 3 more players represented in that class of 2026. Now, college Division I coaches they're not allowed to initiate direct contact with 2026 until June 15th. So, we're a couple of months away from that being a marker for when coaches can start directly contacting. They can be contacting and have contact. They can contact certain folks to check on things. They can't make direct contact to the recruit. All right, so that's a little bit important. However, you've got 3 top 100 kids, top 60 kids according to ESPN's rankings in that 2026 class. Jashawn Andrews, 6'6" wing at Little Rock Christian Academy, helped the Warriors to back-to-back 4A state titles. He was the title game MVP this past season. He's been a top 20 for ESPN for a while. He's actually moved up from 18th, 16th, and I think in the most recent update, he's up to number 13. He's been a part of the Team USA mini camps, just one that went by recently, as was Terrion Burgess. I failed to mention that for 2025 when we was talking about Burgess. He also went through that camp, did really well out there. But J.J. Andrews also has been part of the Team USA stuff. But 13th, 5-star ranking, according to ESPN. And so we keep moving along here because this is big time to me. Jacob Lanier, I keep talking about him. I see him as a guy that potentially is a 5-star. I do need to do some live streams on the history of Razorback basketball. Jacob Lanier, 6'6" guard at Maumelle. Also got rave reviews, daily standout performer reports coming out of Team USA camp just a few weeks ago, back when the Final Four was going on in Phoenix, so earlier this month. But up to number 33, so he's inching closer to that top 25. And a guy that I think I've talked about him in my eyes as being a 5-star talent. I feel the same way about Burgess in 25. Certainly J.J. Andrews in 26. And Jacob Lanier is another one of those guys, in my opinion, another high major. Now, he's on the Nike EYBL circuit, as is J.J. Andrews, but number 33 in ESPN's top 60 for class of 2026. And rounding that out, Aiden Chronister. And by the way, all these guys had offers from the previous staff, from the previous coaching staff, with the exception of Kellen Robinson in 2025. So all these other names I've mentioned had offers from the previous staff. We'll see where it goes with the new staff. But Aiden Chronister comes in at number 60, a 4-star. 247 Sports has read him rated in the top 40, I think 38th the last I looked, but ESPN at number 60. But he's a guy that, 6'7" wing out of Rogers High School in Northwest Arkansas. So you see a lot of great names around Central Arkansas. That's typical, but you also see them from all over the state. It was Gafford and El Laredo, Isaiah Joe, Jalen Williams from Fort Smith. I mean, you look around the West Memphis has put out a lot, all over the state. But in Northwest Arkansas right now, with Isaiah Seeley and Aiden Chronister, you've got two guys that are mentioned. And I haven't even mentioned Cortland Muldrew, a guard at Springdale Harbor, who's got some high major offers, electric scorer. He's a guy that I haven't seen in top 100 rankings, but he's another guy that at one point in time, and I believe it was Orlando Antigua. I'm not sure who's now with Brad Underwood at Illinois, but I think maybe Orlando Antigua had inquired about Muldrew when he was part of that Kentucky staff. Made an inquiry about him. So anyway, getting past that, a lot of really good players in Arkansas. That it just seems to get better and better, and so we'll see. But there has been some initial outreach. So there's a nugget I've given you today. We're over an hour now, an hour and 5 minutes. I had really thought I was going to go a half hour. I guess I need to be more concise. I want to thank everybody for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live today. Really appreciate if you could drop down there and hit that subscribe button if you already haven't. I want to thank my sponsor, Jose's Bar and Grill in Tawnytown. We did not have a light glare today because I guess it's overcast today. We'll see if we get rain. Thanks, Bob. I like Coach Smart. Hope he lands at a good spot. I'm no Bob Holt. Maybe that wasn't a reference to me. And I didn't get to the comments today. But I think buckle in. I think we could see some announcements today. I can't prove that. I'm not 100% sure that they'll come out today, but I kind of think they will. Some. And again, I think by the time we get to the other side of the weekend, Arkansas very well could be publicly at a point where they're nearly at least half of the roster filled. 6 or 7, I think that. And I was told coming the week, look for maybe 5 off the board with Z already in the fold. So it couldn't land like that. Maybe one more than that. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't know exactly how it's going to publicly roll off. Thanks everybody. We'll jump on here, maybe back on later today. Depends on how much fireworks we get throughout today. It's a lot of fireworks Tuesday, quiet yesterday. Maybe today's another day with fireworks. I kind of think it might be. So going to sign off now. Until then, well, I'll see you then.